Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Shayantani Pal, Associate Professor, Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. Today our subject is Indian culture. The paper is Economic History of India and I will be speaking on the economic development under the Guptas. Now the learning objectives. The learning objectives are the sources regarding the economic development under the Guptas, the agriculture under the Guptas, the crops, the types of land, measurement, price, privileges and conditions of land grant, peasants, impact of the creation of agraharas, the crafts and the guilds, the trade and commerce, coinage and taxation. Now, as you can see, this is a map of the Gupta Empire. The Guptas were one of the most powerful and famous rulers of Indian history, and the Gupta age was earlier regarded as the golden age of India, as the classical age of India. The Guptas began their rule in the northern part of present Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and they covered, this was their core territory, their capital was in Pataliputra. They began their rule in the in the early part of the 4th century CE, and they continued to rule up to the middle of the 6th century, and they conquered a large number of territories and they introduced their rule in many peripheral areas. So they have influenced Indian history in various ways, but one may ask the question, what are the impacts of the change of dynasty on economic history of India? So, I will discuss on this point through this lecture. Now, the introduction. The Guptas established their rule in larger parts of North India from circa 319-320 to 550 CE. They supported the creation of agraharas by their subordinates in many areas like Bengal, Assam, Western India, Odisha, Central India, etc. Now, what are the agraharas? The agraharas were actually tax-free villages granted to the Brahmanas or religious institutions by the rulers and the subordinates. The creation of agraharas resulted in the restructuring of the economy in those areas through the introduction of landed intermediaries. Who were the landed intermediaries? This I will explain in the later part of my lecture with the help of a chart. The Guptas also introduced a regular system of taxation. The gold coins of the Guptas are very high in their artistic merit. The sources for the study of the history of the Guptas. Now, the Guptas were the very first rulers who have issued a large number of inscriptions. Their inscriptions are of various categories. There are prashastis of rulers. The most famous is the Allahabad pillar inscription. Next, there are also land grants, but for the purpose of economic history of India, the most important are the land grants and not the prashastis, because the prashastis do not contain data on much more data on economic history of India. Now, there are also the Smriti texts. What are the Smriti texts? The Smriti texts are the Smritis composed by authorities like Narada, like Brihaspati, like Yagyavalkya. All these major Smriti texts were completed by the end of the 6th century AD. So, they reflect the data regarding the economy of the Gupta period. There are also, apart from the Smritis, there are also some literary texts like the Brihat Samhita of Varaha Mihira, which also most probably belong to the 6th century CE. This Brihat Samhita is actually a text on astronomy, astrology and other aspects. Then there are works of Kalidasa, as all of us know that Kalidasa was a very famous poet of the Gupta period, and his different compositions like Avijnana Shakuntalam, Raghuvansham, most of them contain much data regarding the history of the Guptas. And there is also an encyclopedia, Amara Kosha of Amara Singha. Kosha actually means encyclopedia. So, Amara Kosha is an encyclopedia which contains some words related to the economy of the Gupta period. Now, these are some important publications on the Guptas. The Gupta Empire, written by Radhakumud Mukherjee, one of the earliest publications on the Guptas. Next, you can see the classical age, which belongs to the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan series, and this was edited by R.C. Majumdar. Now that the Gupta age was a classical age of India, this idea was actually introduced by R.C. Majumdar. We will discuss this point, whether the Gupta age can be regarded as a classical age, in the later part of this lecture. Then there are several other publications, among which you can see the Imperial Guptas, a cultural history by P.L. Gupta, and one of the most recent publications regarding the history of the Guptas is Rise and Fall of the Imperial Guptas by Ashwini Agarwal. The agriculture under the Guptas. There was a proliferation of the Agraharas, the tax-free villages of the Brahmanas, due to the land grants made to the Brahmanas by the rulers and the subordinates. There were various categories of land-based social groups which existed in the rural areas. As for example, I can refer to a series of copper plates from the northern part of present Bangladesh and West Bengal. These copper plates are found in places like Damodarpur, Dinajpur, and they record the same sale of land and the subsequent grant of the same land by local people to Brahmanas and religious institutions. In this charter usually begin with reference to the Gupta emperor like Kumaragupta I, Buddhagupta, Vishnugupta, etc. So, these records were actually issued under the Guptas. In these records we find various social groups like the Mahattaras. The Mahattaras were the elders of the village who had a say in every important matter related to the village, like the buying and selling of land. Then there were the Kutumbins. The Kutumbins were also a very influential group. The Kutumbins were actually wealthy class of peasants. And finally, we have the Karshakas, who were not like the Kutumbins, they were not as wealthy as were the Kutumbins, but they were ordinary peasants. So, we have at least reference to 3 groups related to land. They are the Mahattaras, the Kutumbins and the Karshakas. So, this refers to the existence of a stratified society in rural areas on the basis of the possession of land, which is an important development of the Gupta period. This is a picture of the Damodarpur copper plate of the time of Vishnugupta, about which I have already told. This has been dated in the Gupta era 224, that comes to 543 CE. You can see the rectangular shape of the copper plate and the seal of the seal, but this seal is not the dynastic seal of the Guptas. This is actually the seal of the local Adhikarana. Adhikarana means the office, and this office was actually the authority for the buying and selling of the land in that locality. Now, the crops of the Gupta period. Regarding most of the references to the crops, we find them in the literary sources. As for example, Shali. Shali was a very important variety of rice. This was a high quality of rice which grew in Bihar and Bengal. We find references to the Shali variety of rice in the account of Swansang and also in the in the poems of Kalidasa. Swansang refers to the Shali rice which was offered to the respected guests of the Nalanda monastery, because this was a very high quality rice. And Kalidasa also refers to the Shali rice fields and women folk sitting in the shades of the Shali rice, and they were watching the beauty of the sugarcane field. So, Shali rice was a very important and a perfumed variety of rice which grew in Bihar and Bengal. And then the Amara Kosha, which is an encyclopedia, it refers to cotton, mustard seeds, indigo, etc. Then sugarcane was also an important commercial crop, about which we find abundant references in the copper plate charters as well as in the literary works of the Gupta period. Types of land. Types of land actually forms a very important subject matter in most of the literary works of the Gupta period. As for example, in the Amara Kosha, we have references to at least 12 types of land. We have reference to Urvara, Ushara, which means the land which is fallow land, which is fallow. Then we have reference to Maru, which means desert land. Then we have reference to Aprahata. Aprahata means most probably untilled land. Then we have reference to Sadvala, which means grassy land. Then Pankila, Jalaprayam Anupam, which is land situated near a water body. We have reference to Kacha, which probably means marshy land. Sarkara, Sarkarati, the meaning is not clear for these two cases. And then Nadi Matrika, which means river fed land, and then Deva Matrika, which means rain fed land. Sometimes the same land, the same locality has been described as both Nadi Matrika and Deva Matrika. As for example, in a later text, the Ramacharita of the Pala period, most probably 10th to 11th century, we find that Barendri, that is northern part of the Bengal delta, was both a Nadimatrika and the Devamatrika land. The copperplate charter also referred to a large number of types of land. They refer to the kshetra, which is the cultivable land, the aprahata. Now, aprahata also most probably mean untilled and uncultivated land. Then they also contain references to khilo land or fallow land, which were sold by the charters issued in the Damodarpur area. Now, the measurement of land. The measurement of land forms a very important subject matter in the combined deeds of sale and purchase grant of land, as I have already discussed, those coming from the northern part of the Bengal delta. There are two units, Kullo-Vapo and Drono-Vapo, which are mentioned in the charters of North Bengal. As you can see, they end with the suffix Vapo. Vapo most probably means to sow. Kullo-Vapo and Drono-Vapo were most probably the seed measures. One Kullo-Vapo was equivalent to 8 Drono-Vapos of land. Then again, in the Kumilla area, Kumilla is a slightly different area than the northern part of the Bengal delta. It is situated in present southeastern part of Bangladesh. This area was different, and here we find a larger unit which is called Pataka. Now, the use of a larger unit most probably refers to the greater availability of land in the Kumilla area than in the northern part of the Bengal delta. Then again, in the Deccan under the Bakatakas, we have reference to a land measure called the Nivartana, which was also used by the Shatavahanas who ruled earlier in this area. The price of land. The price of land is again, references to the price of land is again found in the series of combined deeds of land sale and land grant in the northern part of the Bengal delta. They refer to the payment of a Kullo-Vapo or Drono-Vapo of land in terms of the coins called dinaras. The dinaras are actually Gupta gold coins. And we also find that the price of the land actually depended on the location of land. Since in the northern part of the Bengal delta, most of the charters record the transaction of fallow land, the price is less. But in the Faridpur area, Faridpur is an area in the central part of present Bangladesh. This area was much different from the northern part of Bengal delta. There the price of land in terms of dinara coins are higher. Most probably they were not fallow lands, they were cultivated lands, so the price was higher in those cases. Now, the privileges and the conditions of land grants. The privileges of land grants are known as pariharas in the Arthashastra. That land grants should contain pariharas is a concept we find as early as the time of the Arthashastra. The land grants came with certain privileges known as the pariharas. Often the granted villages were made free from the entry of irregular and regular troops, the charters and bhattas. Now, why the charters and bhattas were prohibited to enter the granted area? Because the charters and bhattas were soldiers, and they most probably they threatened people to pay money. So, they were prohibited by the state to enter to the gifted villages. Now, R.S. Sharma suggested that the grant of certain privileges entitled the donee administrative and judicial rights like punishing an offender over the village. We have reference to Dashaporadho, the grant of Dashaporadho. Now, Dashaporadho most probably means a fine which is to be taken by the state for committing 10 specific types of offences. Now, the question is whether Dashaporadho is a judicial right. If you grant Dashaporadho together with the land, whether the donee or the recipient gets the right to punish the offender or to judge the offender whether he has committed such offences, or he was entitled to collect only the income from the Dashaporadho. This is basically the question. This could have again resulted in the autonomy of the recipient if the recipient was granted such judicial right according to the argument of R.S. Sharma. Then in the absence of royal authority, the recipient could have assumed more and more power in such small pockets. These were some arguments put forward by R.S. Sharma. Now, there are a different opinion expressed by D.C. Sarkar, Dinesh Chandra Sarkar. He opposed this view of Sharma and he pointed out that it is only the income from the gift village that used to be granted and not the proprietary right over land plots lying within the village. The Doni was also not granted the right to impose additional taxes. Now, we do not know what happened, but these are the two arguments, two opposite kind of arguments put forward by R.S. Sharma and D.C. Sarkar. Now, the condition of the peasants. What happened to the peasants after these land grants? The landed property obtained by the religious beneficiaries like the Brahmanas, the temples and viharas required a large number of peasants who would cultivate those lands. The peasants appointed for this purpose were thus not landowners, but they were landless peasants. As a result, the religious beneficiaries emerged as the landed intermediaries. Intermediaries means one who stands between two persons. So, the king and between the king and the peasants, these religious beneficiaries stood as the intermediaries. The peasants came to be subjected to as an increased burden of taxation and other kinds of oppression like immobility, that the peasants could not leave the land of his landowner even if he was subjected to oppression and torture, forced labor which is called vishti in the land grants, and so on. Now, this is a chart showing the rise of intermediaries. The column to the left shows the condition in the pre-300 CE period. There was only two stages, the king and the peasant. So, there was a direct relationship between the king and the peasant, there was no intermediary. But in the later period, as in the Gupta period, in the Smritis, as I have already discussed about the Smritis refer to a three-tier land system with three strata. At the top is the Mahipati or the king, in the middle is the Swami or the landlord, and at the lowest end is the Karshako or the owner of the land. So, there are three persons who are related to land. So, there are three stratas which are related to land. Now, the impact of the creation of agraharas. There are debates regarding the impact of the creation of agraharas in different areas. The rise of landed intermediaries as a result of the creation of agraharas by land grants brought significant changes in the economy of the Gupta period. Now, there are debates. What are the debates? According to R.S. Sharma, this system must have surely put pressure on the royal treasury, since the granted land was made tax free and thus the state lost its income. This is the argument of R.S. Sharma. On the other hand, uncultivated lands were actually reclaimed by the land grants, because Brahmanas and religious beneficiaries like temples and viharas were actually granted fallow land. So, they would cultivate land to get the income. So, in this way fresh lands were brought under cultivation, and this rather promoted the expansion of agriculture. And as a result, forest lands were also cleared and new settlements were also established. Now, these are the two authorities about whom I have already discussed, Professor D.C. Sarkar and Professor R.S. Sharma, the two famous scholars who have different types of opinions regarding the creation of agraharas. Now, the crafts in the Gupta period. The Amara Kosho refers to a list of crafts practiced in the Gupta period. This suggests the increasing demand of metal workers. The metal workers were now very busy, since there are a large number of land grants were being made. So, large number of copper plates needed to be manufactured. So, the metal workers were very popular. Among them, the Karmokaros made iron weapons and household implements. The iron pillar of Mehrauli near Delhi is a wonderful instance of metallurgical skill of the period. It still does not contain any rust. In the Amara Kosho, reference has been made to garments of coarse and fine threads made by the weavers. In fact, Varanasi was very famous for the manufacture of garments. However, the state initiative in the field of crafts is not at all clear from these literary sources, and it has been assumed that most probably the state could have controlled the production of salt, as it would appear from the copper plate charters. This is a picture of the Meheroli iron pillar inscription bearing the inscription of King Chandra. Although the King Chandra cannot be identified properly, most probably it refers to King Chandragupta II, the Gupta ruler, and here is his inscription. But the most striking feature is that still these pillars do not contain any rust. Now the guilds. The corporate organizations of craftsmen were known as Shreni, Sangha or Nigama. The earlier European scholars who worked on them, they compared them with the European guilds, but the European guilds and the Indian Shrenis and Nigamas are slightly different in their functions. The guilds, however, became lesser in number in the Gupta period, since in the Jatakas, beginning from the Jatakas, we have references to a lot of guilds, but in the text of the Gupta period, we do not find references to so many numbers of guilds. The rules and regulations for the proper functioning of guilds have been discussed in the Smritis like those by the Narada and Brihaspati. This indicates that how a guild should function, what should be the regulations of a guild, form an important subject matter to the Dharmashastra authorities. The Shrenis have been given the right to punish its members violating their rules. Now this is very important, since the right to punish an offender is a state prerogative. The state here is surrendering this right to the Shrenis. So this indicates how much importance the state placed over the Shrenis. The trade and commerce in the Gupta period. The Amara Kosha contains abundant references to the Shreshti. The Shreshtis are wealthy merchant, as I have already discussed, and the Sarthavahas. The Sarthavahas are actually caravan traders who used to lead the caravans to the distant lands. The travel accounts of Fajian and Xuanzang extensively deals with routes throughout the country, many of which must have been used for trade. Now the use of routes and ensuring the safety in the routes is an important function of the state. The trade was now carried on through the Persian Gulf. As all of us know, in the pre-300 CE period, Indo-Roman trade was very important and it was carried through the Red Sea, but now the Indo-Roman trade had declined, but Ranavir Chakraborty has expressed the view that after the establishment of the Byzantine Empire in the later half of the 5th century CE, they became very interested in carrying on trade with the East. And the Sasanians also were interested in carrying on trade with the East. So both the Byzantines and the Sasanian wanted to control the trade, and now trade was carried through the Persian Gulf instead of the Red Sea, and as a result the ports of the western seaboard of India regained their vitality. The Christian topography composed by Cosmas towards the end of the 6th century refers to the importance of ports like Chaul and Kalyan in the Konkan coast. The east coast had trade relations with Southeast Asia, which is very important in this period. Both Fajian and Xuanzang refers to the port of Tamralipta in the lower Bengal, and Xuanzang again refers to the connection of Samatata. Samatata means the Kumilla and Noakhali regions in the southeastern part of present Bangladesh with the countries of Southeast Asia. This was most probably trade relations. Now the coinage of the Guptas. The coinage of the Guptas are very high in their artistic merit. The hoards of Gupta coins have been unearthed from UP, Bihar, Bengal, Rajasthan and other places. Now the Gupta gold coin, the Guptas were the first indigenous rulers who issued a very high quality of gold coin. Earlier gold coins were issued by the Indo-Greeks, the Scythoparthians, the Kushanas, but all of them came from the outside. The Guptas were most probably the first indigenous rulers to issue very high quality gold coins. It is believed that Suvarna was a heavier standard introduced by Skandagupta. Now the Gupta gold coins were issued in two different standards. One was the Dinara standard, which is a lighter standard, and it was imitated from the Roman denarius. It was equivalent to 121 grains, and then the Suvarna standard is a heavier standard which was issued by Skandagupta, and these coins were usually heavier in weight. But how did they become heavier? From their metallic purity most probably declined due to the heavy warfare during the period of Skandagupta. since there were a large number of invasions from outside, invasion by the Pushyamitra tribe, invasion by the Hunas. These had put most probably put a lot of pressure on the royal treasury, and so the metallic purity of the gold coins most probably declined from the period of Skandagupta. This is a very important publication on the coinage of the Gupta Empire. This is by A. S. Altekar. Now, the function of the Gupta coinage, as we have already discussed that the Gupta coins are of a very high artistic merit, but what was their function in the day-to-day transaction? The dinaro coins were actually of very high value, and they were most probably used for transaction of land, since we find references to the payment of the price of land in terms of dinaro coins in the combined deeds of sale and land grant from the northern part of the Bengal delta. So, dinaro was a very high value coin which was used in the transaction of land. But what happened to the ordinary day-to-day transaction? What was the medium of exchange in the day-to-day transaction? For ordinary transactions, cowries must have been in use, and the Guptas also issued silver and copper coins, but they were not very regular and their role in market economy cannot be determined. The silver coins were designed after the model of the Kshatrapa silver coins of Gujarat. These were introduced by Chandragupta II, who conquered western India by ousting the Shaka satraps. These are some specimens of the beautiful gold coins of the Guptas. On the top you can see the standard type of coins of Samudragupta. On the obverse, the king is holding a standard and offering oblation at an altar. The Garuda standard is beside him, and the legend is in his name Samudra. On the reverse side of the coin, we can find Lakshmi, seated Lakshmi, and this is called the standard type, since the king is holding a standard on the obverse of the coin. In the coin below, this is called the archer type of coin. This was issued by Chandragupta. You can see the name Chandra written on the obverse. The king holds a bow and an arrow, and on the reverse side there is a picture of Lakshmi. These are the two famous types of coins of Samudragupta. On the top is the Ashwamedha coin. This refers to the performance of the Ashwamedha sacrifice by Samudragupta. On the obverse there is the horse of the Ashwamedha Yagga, and on the reverse there is the picture of the queen. And at below this coin, this is also famous coin of Samudragupta. This is called the lyrist type of coin. On the obverse of this coin, the king is playing a veena, and on the reverse of the coin there is a picture of the goddess Lakshmi. This is a silver coin of Chandragupta II issued after the conquest of western India. As I have already discussed that the silver coins of the Guptas were actually modelled after the silver coins of the Shaka satraps, which were in use in the western coast of India. The obverse shows the bust of king, and the reverse shows in the middle the Garuda with outstretched wings and with a circular legend in the name of Chandragupta II. Now, the urban centers in the Gupta period. The urban centers, the decline of long distance trade could have also led to the decline of urban crafts. Now, what happens when the urban crafts like the production of luxurious items, the production of precious ornaments, semi-precious stone ornaments, what happens when they decline? Most probably the urban center also declines. However, one should not generalize the conclusion. The Kama Sutra of Vatshayana actually refers to the luxurious way of life of the Nagaraka. Who is the Nagaraka? The Nagaraka is the city dweller. So, he used to lead a very luxurious way of life. So, we should not generalize the conclusion that all the urban centers declined, but Xuanzang, who came in the 7th century CE after the Gupta period, he refers to Pataliputra as a dilapidated city. So, this has given the impression that all the urban centers most probably declined in the Gupta and the post-Gupta period due to the decline of trade and due to the decline of urban crafts. So, without enough wealth, it would have been impossible to maintain such a high standard of living. So, we should not conclude from the account of Xuanzang that all the urban centers declined in the post-Gupta period. The taxation. The Guptas actually introduced a regular system of taxation about which we came to know from their copperplate charters. In their copperplate charters, we have reference to Bhaga. Bhaga was the king's grain share, which is 1/6 of the produce. Uparikara is most probably as it refers to the additional tax, upari. Taxes were also paid in cash apart from kind. This was known as hiranya. The Gupta kings had put heavy burden of taxation on the subjects. This goes against actually the view of labeling the Gupta age as the golden age. Now I should summarize my talk on the economy of the Gupta period. The question which we will discuss is whether the Gupta period should be called a golden age or a classical age. Now in point of literary achievements or in point of the achievements in art and architecture, the Gupta period may be called a golden age, since we have a very high quality of poems written by Kalidas, and there are many beautiful examples of temples of the Gupta period, paintings of the Gupta period. So, they are of very high quality, and in this aspect the Gupta period may be called as a golden age or a classical age of Indian history. What happened in economy? In the copper plate charters, we find large number of taxes like dashaparadho, like uparikaro, like bhago, bhogo, karo, hiranya, etc. Lot of taxes have put pressure on the peasants. So, peasants were living under a very deplorable condition. So, why should we regard the Gupta period as a golden age, not in terms of economy? Rather, Romila Thapar has called the Gupta age earlier as a tinsel age. Whether we should agree with her is not a point, but the Gupta period cannot be regarded as a golden age in terms of the economic condition of the period.